Some crimes grab headlines for a few days, maybe a few weeks, and then fade from memory. But others are different. They don't just shock us. They seep into the fabric of a community and stay there, unresolved, leaving a chilling silence that lasts for years. This is the story of one such case. A murder that was never solved, a life that was taken without explanation, and a set of questions that still haunt those left behind. Our story takes place in a quiet, unassuming community in the United Kingdom. This was a place where life had a predictable rhythm. People knew their neighbors, followed their daily routines, and felt a sense of security. The streets were familiar, the faces were friendly, and there was no reason to believe that danger was lurking just around the corner. It was a town where nothing ever really happened, until one day, something terrible did. The person at the center of this story was, by all accounts, ordinary. They weren't a public figure, nor were they known for a dramatic lifestyle. They lived a simple, quiet life. They went to work, came home, and made plans for a future they believed was guaranteed. Friends and family described them as predictable, reliable, and intensely private. There were no known enemies, no public disputes, no lingering conflicts that could have hinted at the violence to come. They were simply living their life day by day, completely unaware that their time was running out. In the days leading up to the tragedy, everything appeared normal. There were no frantic phone calls, no overheard arguments, no reports of strange behavior. The victim's routine remained unbroken. It was this very predictability that would make what happened next so profoundly disturbing. They continued with their daily tasks, oblivious to the fact that their life was about to be cut short in the most brutal way imaginable. The discovery of the body sent an immediate shockwave through the community and the investigating police force. The scene itself was baffling. This wasn't a random attack in a dark alley. The location was familiar, a place the victim knew well. This suggested something deeply personal. It implied the victim might not have been afraid of their killer, at least not initially. Perhaps they even let them in. Investigators quickly understood they were not dealing with an impulsive act of violence. This felt planned. It felt calculated. Police cordoned off the area and a meticulous investigation began. But from the very start, the crime scene offered more questions than answers. There were no obvious signs of a break-in, which reinforced the theory that the killer was known to the victim. No murder weapon was ever found at the scene, or anywhere else. And, most frustratingly, there were no witnesses. No one saw anything. No one heard anything. It was as if the crime had occurred in a vacuum, completely shielded from the outside world. Forensic teams worked tirelessly, collecting every possible trace of evidence. They found fingerprints, fibers, and DNA. But while the evidence proved that someone else had been there, it didn't match anyone in the national databases. It created a profile of a ghost, an unknown person who had entered the victim's life, committed a terrible act, and then vanished without a trace. Without a suspect to compare it to, the forensic evidence was a dead end. Detectives turned their focus to the victim's personal life, hoping to uncover a motive. They began the painstaking process of interviewing everyone who knew them. Family members were questioned about private dynamics and hidden tensions. Friends were asked to recount their last conversations, searching for any unusual details. Colleagues and neighbors were pressed for information about the victim's habits and any strangers they might have seen in the area. A complex picture began to form, but it was full of contradictions. Some stories lined up perfectly, but others had slight inconsistencies. Alibis had small, nagging gaps. Timelines didn't quite match up. Minor details, things that might seem unimportant on their own, started to create a fog of uncertainty. There was nothing solid enough to justify an arrest, but there was more than enough to fuel suspicion. The investigators felt they were close, that the answer was hiding in plain sight, but they just couldn't grasp it. As the investigation progressed, a handful of individuals were quietly designated as persons of interest. These weren't official suspects, but they were people who couldn't be definitively ruled out. Each one had something that kept them on the police radar. One person had unexplained access to the victim's home. Another couldn't fully account for their whereabouts during the critical time frame. The door simply behaved in a way that raised red flags, but in every single case, there was no direct evidence linking them to the crime. No confession, no witness, no forensic match. Without that crucial piece of the puzzle, the police were powerless to act. Weeks turned into months, and the momentum of the investigation began to slow. The promising leads had all been exhausted. The trail had gone cold. Witness memories, once sharp, started to become hazy and unreliable. The public's attention moved on to other news, and the case that had once dominated the headlines slowly faded from the front pages. The police resources were reallocated to more recent crimes, but for the victim's family, the passage of time meant nothing. For them, the clock had stopped on the day their loved one was taken from them. The impact on the wider community was profound and long-lasting. The sense of safety that had once defined their town was shattered. People started locking their doors more carefully. They looked at their neighbors with a new sense of caution. The familiar streets suddenly felt different, tinged with an unspoken fear. The murder had left an invisible scar on the collective psyche of the town, a constant reminder that the world was not as safe as they had once believed. The ordinary routines of life now felt fragile and uncertain. Eventually, with no new leads and no clear path forward, the case was officially classified as cold. This doesn't mean it was closed. Simply means it was unsolved, unfinished, and left in a state of indefinite suspension. No one was ever charged. No one was ever held accountable for the crime. And for the victim's family, this lack of resolution became a unique and enduring form of pain. They were left with no explanation for their loss, no sense of closure, and no justice for the person they loved. All they had were questions, an endless loop of what-ifs and whys that no one could answer. Today, years later, the case remains open but inactive. The files sit in a dusty archive, a monument to a crime that defied solution. Somewhere out there, the truth still exists. It might be locked away in a memory that someone has been too afraid to share. It could be hidden in a small, seemingly insignificant detail that was overlooked during the initial investigation. Or perhaps it lies in the heavy silence that someone has carried with them for all these years. Until that silence is broken, until that truth finally comes to light, this case serves as a chilling reminder. It reminds us that sometimes, despite the best efforts of law enforcement, justice is not always served. Some stories never get a proper ending, and some answers remain buried forever, lost to time. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into cases that continue to baffle us. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next one.